We've all seen the term limited edition on records. It's not new, it's been going on for a long time. Is there value in it? Is there truth to it? That's what we will discuss on this episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, small chain of independent shops in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you're not local, but you are in the US, we do ship anywhere in the States. You can shop online at ntxvinyl.com and would love it if you'd subscribe here on our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Let's get into it. We're going to talk about limited quantities of records, why they are pressed in limited quantities, why some artists and labels choose to do so, and the difference between a limited quantity and a marketing term like limited edition, right? So let's discuss that first. We've all seen limited edition stickers. Sometimes it's on the hype sticker, sometimes it's on the jacket itself, maybe even on the label of the disc. And the reality is that in most cases, limited edition is used as a way to sell more records. I think a lot of people know that, just as if you go into the grocery store, you have to take it with a grain of salt. If you see, natural on some sort of packaged good, what does that really mean, right? Same thing as with limited edition. I'm actually not here to talk about limited edition records because, again, unless there's an actual number to the album, the numbers that are pressed, then the term limited edition can essentially mean anything, and it leaves it open-ended for the label or the artist to press as many as they want. You can see this as an example in Walmart's, because pretty much every single exclusive Walmart pressing says limited edition, and no one knows if they're going to continue to press them over time or if they truly are limited and they'll never be pressed again. Again, it leaves the door open for the marketing departments to put that on there, so hopefully they can sell more, to create some fear in the market, create some demand in the market that if you don't buy it now, it may go away, right? What I actually want to discuss today is legitimately why labels and artists choose to press lower quantities when it's, again, when they are numbered or when they come out and they say they've only pressed a certain number. This is very prevalent today, especially with events like Record Store Day, where almost all of those titles come out with a pressing number. And then, but even in normal circumstances, when new releases come out, sometimes they are phrased just as limited edition, but other times there are actually numbered copies, or when it's announced, they will say it is limited to a number of copies, right? Why would anyone do that? I get this question all the time when an album is on the secondary market and it's very expensive. And they say, well, why don't they just press more? Or a new album comes out and it's immediately sold out everywhere. And I get questions from customers saying, well, why didn't they just press more of them, right? It seems like a very logical thought to have, but you have to understand the business to understand why artists and labels do this. And that's what I'm here to discuss. So you've kind of got two, I'll put these in two buckets, right? First of all, you've got current day artists who are active. Now, if you're an active artist, meaning you're still alive, you're still writing, recording, performing, right? That's what I'm defining as an active artist. How many albums are you going to press? Let's say you've got a new album coming out. You've got to get a gauge on your audience or your fan base, because obviously you don't want to press too few. It'll sell out immediately and it frustrates fans, and then you're not selling as many records. Believe me, everyone is in the business of wanting to sell as many records as possible for the most part. At the same time, you don't want to press so many that they flood the market, and then you've got a ton of overhead in regards to how much you've spent to make those albums, and they're sitting around collecting dust, right? So for current artists, they've got some data that they can base their decision on, right? How many, followers do they have on social media? How many people are listening to their current music on the charts, on Spotify or on Apple Music, right? They play shows. How many people are showing up to attend their events, right? So they can look at all of these numbers and go, based on these numbers, maybe their last album they put out on vinyl, how many did they sell on the last one, right? So they actually have data and can make an educated decision based on, hey, we think we're pretty comfortable for this initial pressing of doing, let's say, 5,000 records. Our last one sold, 3,000, but our audience has grown a lot. We're a bigger band now. We've got a big tour. We're doing a lot of promotion. Our new label's going to really help us out. So we're going to do 5,000, right? They're taking a guess. They don't really know. That album could go out, they could get reviews. Maybe the reviews don't come back as good as they'd hoped. Maybe they were hoping to get more airplay on, independent radio. Maybe they planned a big tour and part of that tour didn't go as planned and not as many people showed up. All these things impact an artist's ability to sell albums, and they've got to take that all into account when they're deciding how many to press. So this is where the guesswork becomes, because there's no silver bullet, right? If you're an artist or a label and you're planning to release an album on a physical format like a vinyl record, there's a lot of overhead there. So you don't want to guess wrong in a big way, because there's a lot of implications to that, right? Let's say you go out of the gate and you say, let's press 20,000 because we want to make sure all of our fans can get this. We want to make sure and get it into all of the record stores we can, right? Well, let's say again, it doesn't sell as well as you'd hoped. Then they're sitting there with thousands and thousands of albums. What happens to those? Well, first of all, you're talking about a very fragile, delicate thing, a vinyl record, right? It's heavy, it's sensitive to temperature, it's sensitive to dust, it's got to be kept in an environment that is clean, and it takes up a lot of space. So if you've got pallets of these albums left over, where are they going to go? That's a big deal. And again, I'm putting this on a small scale of 5, 10,000 albums, 20,000 albums. You know, take a larger artist where they're taking big bets. They're pressing maybe hundreds of thousands of these, hoping that the public agrees this is a great new album, that the press goes well for the album, that the tour sells well, and all of the excitement around it actually goes as planned, and those albums actually move and people buy them, right? So you're taking a gamble, and you've got in this educated guess that current day artists take, again, but at least they have some data to back it up. Again, I already mentioned, number of tickets they've sold, number of streams they've had, number of records they've sold from their last album or two, right? All those things play in, and that's what gives an artist or a label the confidence in to say, you know what, let's press this many. But it backfires all the time because they don't want to go out on a limb. Guess what? Records are expensive. They're not only expensive for you to buy, they're expensive to make. It's not like people are paying pennies to have records made and then selling them for $25, $30, $40, right? The margin is not great because it is a physical thing. There are only so many pressing plants, and you've got to get in line and wait your turn in line. And then the cost of the goods, which is cost of goods sold, if you know anything about the retail business, is substantial. So artists and labels don't want to go out of pocket on tons and tons, many thousands of extra albums if they don't have to. They would rather meet the demand, obviously have some supply left over so that it doesn't immediately go out of print, so it can remain at record stores. They have some to take on tour for the immediate future until they can make a decision if they need to do a repress of that album of another couple thousand or whatever it may be, right? So it's a big decision for a label and an artist how many to press, and there's not always a clear answer. So it can definitely be very telling for a current day artist about where they think their career's going. If you see their record everywhere, well, they took a pretty big bet that they thought this was going to sell well, right? At the same time, if it's not found anywhere and it was just released a week ago, well, that tells you like, hey, they underestimated the demand for that album in the market. So it's a very, very tricky scale to try and balance. And artists and labels are going through that every day when they decide how many albums to press, because they don't want to have to store these albums. They don't want to have to pay to store them. They don't want to go out of pocket to have that many pressed if they're not going to actually sell. It's completely different when you just throw your album up on YouTube or on a streaming service or whatever it may be, because there's no overhead there, right? And that's the great thing, and that's the convenience, not only for the consumer of those of streaming digital files, digital music, but also the convenience for the artist and the label, because there's way less risk involved, right? So that's a current day artist. They have all this data and that they can help them make an educated decision, right? Let's talk about the other type of records that come out, which would be catalog titles. Catalog titles are defined as anything that's being reissued from a back catalog. So an artist that is no longer around, or maybe no longer performing or active, but those albums are still sought after by people who are collecting records and want a copy, right? It's much harder for a label to come to a decision on how many to press, because how do you define the demand on a record that was originally came out in 1975 and now they're going to do the first ever reissue of it? It's really hard to gauge. The same thing can be said for albums like, again, for Record Store Day. I hear a lot of complaints and a lot of questions of like, well, why did they only press 1,000 of this? Well, it was some obscure artist from the late 80s, early 90s. The label has no idea. That artist is long gone. They're not active anymore. Probably didn't have anything to say with getting involved with the pressing in general. The rights to the music has probably transferred hands to multiple different labels. There's a demand for it, but what is that demand? Should they press 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000? It's a big gap in regards to making that decision, because again, if you're a label and you're working on, let's say again, Record Store Day releases, or you're working on just some indie exclusive releases or something coming up that's a back catalog title that you have the ownership for, and you're thinking, man, this would be great to bring this to life on vinyl, you've got to make a decision and commit to how many you're going to press based on that market demand, and how fluid you want that supply to be over the course of weeks, month, or a year. That's the thing, is sometimes it takes time, and record distributors have huge warehouses full of pallets of records, but that costs money to store all those records, and that adds into the expense and the cost of records in general. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind, not only if you're a current day artist, you're putting out new music, or if you're a record label and you're going back and you're mining back catalogs, you're trying to find interesting releases that either maybe never made it to vinyl or just are really scarce and are hard to find on vinyl. So it's a difficult thing to do. I know this firsthand. I run a little independent record label called the DFW Legacy Series with a couple of my good buddies, and we go through this with every release. We're pressing tiny amounts, sometimes between 1 and 200 copies, 300 copies, right? And we're the same way on a much smaller scale. We don't want to press 1,000 copies of something when our guest says, man, maybe there's only 200 or 300 people out there that want this. Why would we not want to do that? It would then be available for everywhere. Well, I can tell you why, because that costs a lot of money to press 1,000 versus 300. It also takes up a lot of space. It also then basically dilutes the value or the scarcity of the people who did buy that record, because now it's going to be available everywhere forever, essentially, if your ratio is that far off, right? So for us, it's always about finding that balance of, we want to press enough so that it's readily available for at least a little while, but not so few that it sells out on pre-order, and by the time the release date comes out, no one can even buy it. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong. We're dealing with artists similar to what I talked about as far as catalog titles. These are artists who, for the most part, aren't around anymore. They're not active. They're not bands still, out in the market doing anything. They haven't put out releases in, 10, 20 years or whatever. So it's a really hard thing to guess. I can guarantee you that. We go through it with every release. And I know that there are independent record labels and major record labels going through the same thing. The less data you have, the more of a chance you're taking, the more of a guess it is. And that can be, again, very frustrating. So if you're going out of pocket, if you're a record label and putting out, some new releases, regardless if it's from a new artist or a catalog title, you've got to be very smart, and you've got to get good at guessing what the demand is in the market for those types of albums, because you want to meet the demand with the supply, but you don't want to go too far under or too far over. So that's really why albums are pressed in limited quantities. I hope that makes sense. It makes sense to me, but I'm on the retail side of the business and have been in the music industry, and I'm on the label side of things. So I completely understand it when I look at the Record Store Day list and see that something is only being, there's only 5,000 copies of it. And you think, 5,000 copies, well, that's a huge artist. I've been listening to them for 30 years. They're one of my favorite bands. Why would they only press 5,000? Well, how's the label supposed to know that? What are they supposed to go off of, right? That artist isn't touring anymore. That artist hasn't put out any releases in years. How are they supposed to know if there's 5,000 people out there who also happen to collect records? That's the other thing. We're in a niche market. I say this to people all the time, like, to you and me who are consumed with vinyl records, who collected, who listened to it, like, we're too close to it. We're still the anomaly, 9 out of 10 people, or man, I would say maybe 99 out of 100 people, don't even know records are made anymore. As far as the general public is concerned, most people just consume music. They put on a streaming service in its background. Again, that's 85% of the music industry, streaming. That very small slice, that niche market of physical media, which is records and CDs and a little bit of tapes, like, we're the minority, and it's very hard for a label to guess how big we are. not only, you know, how big that niche is, but what genres do they like, what artists do they like, how many are going to take the chance and actually spend 20, 30, 40, $50 on a record, you know, as opposed to just streaming it if that's an option. So there's a lot that goes into defining the number of albums that are pressed per title. That's really what I wanted to talk through here is the conversations that are happening at labels and amongst their artists, if they're still active, or the owners of the catalogs. Like that's what they're going through and trying to define these things. So don't always look at limited edition and think, oh, that's complete BS. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's a marketing ploy. But a lot of other times, this is people going out on a limb and taking hopefully an educated guess, or sometimes a complete guess, on how many people are really going to want that album, and they're going to want to pay for it, and they're going to want to own it, right? And so it's a tough decision, and I know it, I know it firsthand, and I know labels and artists are going through this every day when they're trying to determine how many records are pressed, right? So I would love to hear your feedback on this. You know, I've got, again, a unique point of view, I think, because I've been on both sides of the fence. I've been a record collector for many, many years. Now I'm kind of on the retail side. I've also been in the music industry and also in an indie label. So I've kind of got a holistic perspective. But for you as a record buyer, I'd love to see how you perceive the idea that something has just come out and now you can't get it because it wasn't pressed in a high enough quantity. It can be very frustrating, but the reality is that each title is different, and each label and each artist is making these decisions based on you know, the best of their ability with the information they have at hand. And sometimes that information is just a complete guess, a finger in the wind, if you will, of what they think the market is going to want in regards to quantity of that specific title. So love talking about records. As you can see, I would love your feedback on this video and any of the other videos on my channel. I will pop up some more here on the NTX Vinyl YouTube channel. Stick around. Really appreciate all the support. Hope this was helpful, and we'll see you again next time on Talking About Records.